Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
Sensory integration is truly just being able to then put it all together. It's a neurological process that organizes the sensory input from multiple systems so that the body can produce an appropriate coordinated response. So kind of going back to that feedback loop mechanism, we have a sensory input that comes in. We have to register that information, know what it means. Is it noxious or is it pleasurable? And then what kind of response are we going to have from that stimuli coming in? And so there are many individuals that don't register touch a certain way. They might use too much force or not enough force to move through space, to write. When they put their pencil to the paper, they're either writing really lightly or they are pushing so hard that they're constantly having to sharpen their pencil.
Hey there, it's Brooke, and welcome to Finding Hope on the Spectrum, where I have heart-to-heart conversations with parents, professionals, and autistic individuals sharing personal insight and life experiences. Together, we dive deep into supports, programs, and stories that offer inspiration, insight, and most importantly, hope for the neurodiverse community. Before we begin with today's topic, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you know someone who this would be helpful for, please pass it along. Remember to always stay curious, be kind, and have an open heart. All right, we're going to get started. Today, I have a really special guest, and I can't wait to dive deep into our topic. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest, Nancy Marin, and we're going to be talking about a variety of things. She has a wide background and in OT and Reiki and NDT, so many things. So this is a real treat to have Nancy on today. And I am going to go ahead and share a little bit about Nancy. She is the founder of Occu Play, and Nancy has been practicing OT since 1983 and brings such a rich integrated perspective to her work. And she blends Neuro-Developmental Treatment, sensory processing support, yoga, Reiki, and a strong family-centered approach to create meaningful change for kids and their loved ones. And today we're going to be talking about how she weaves all of these things together, all of these tools that she has, and why including siblings and families matters so much to her, and some of the breakthrough stories that she has that have inspired her along the way. So I can't wait to get going and have you hear this one. So let's get started. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I really enjoyed our chat before today and just learning about your background. And I haven't had an OT on yet, so this is so exciting to have an OT on today. But also what I loved is your extensive background that you have. And you have been in the OT world since 1983, which is amazing. And I'm sure you've seen so many changes along the way. But I'd love for you to share just a little bit about how it all started for you.
Okay, great. Yeah, when I say out loud that I've been practicing for 40, it'll be exactly 42 years this month. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
It's like, but I'm only 35, so how is that possible?
Yeah.
But honestly, I had no idea when I was entering college what I really wanted to do. And I knew that I was interested in some form of healthcare, but just had no idea which way I wanted to go. And my sister, who is a physical therapy assistant, and she actually works in the geriatric field, and she's been treating longer than I've been in OT, she strongly encouraged me to consider occupational therapy. She felt like it would just be a great fit with my creativity. I love to create, and I'm not the most creative person, but I enjoy creating in a way that can be helpful for others. And so I volunteered at a local hospital at the time, and I'll never forget, I was just assigned to making heel cushions back in the day. I don't even know if they still have those today, but that lay in the bed and they can't move very well, so they can develop sores on their feet. So I was making heel cushions, and I'm like, this is interesting. And then I further explored through like the Myers-Briggs personality test that OT came up as one of the top five in terms of my interest. And so that kind of started the path into occupational therapy. I honestly didn't know if I would get into the OT program. And back in the day, they were bachelor's programs. Now it's master's and doctorate. But I did apply and I got in, and I just absolutely love this profession and have never turned back. Yeah, so it's been very exciting, and to know that I still am passionate about what I do. And you mentioned briefly about how I've seen changes over the years. Yes, I mean, it's been an incredible journey, which makes it exciting because then I can keep learning myself and finding new tools to utilize to address the patient population that I'm serving.
Amazing. Well, and you certainly are a lifelong learner because you've added so many different tools to your tool belt along the way. It's very
Exactly.
exciting. I love it. And you're in South, or you grew up in South Florida, but you have a private practice in Northeast Florida. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. So I grew up in South Florida and lived there up until 2001. So we moved a few times just as our family grew, but basically lived there my entire life and had the wonderful opportunity to work in a adult rehab nursing facility my first 2 years out of school. And I loved working with that population, but I knew that peds was really where my heart was, especially when I had my own children. And so, just a little bit more in terms of my background, I worked in the school system in South Florida and really enjoyed that. And it was perfect as my daughter was born and, in her early years. And then had a fantastic opportunity to work in a private clinic with an amazing team of therapists that really paved the way for where I am and who I am today. And so when I relocated here to Northeast Florida, I knew nobody, not one soul, and just started putting my feelers out in the community where I am. There was a pediatric office, therapy office, and so I approached them and worked with them for the first 2 years as a contract therapist, doing early intervention, natural environment, going into the homes, into the daycares, preschool settings, and really enjoyed that. But then I knew that it was time to branch off and kind of create my own thing. And so one day, one of the clients that was coming in to see the physical therapist that I was working with at the time, it was a little girl with autism. She was 4 at the time. And the PT set suggested to me, you should talk to her mom, who is a pediatrician locally. And so it was a rainy Tuesday. I'll never forget. I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I'll never forget that moment
Yes.
when I went over to her practice and introduced myself. And we spoke for probably over 2 hours. And then I ended up leasing one room from her. And she kind of gave me the opportunity to grow within her office setting, but on my own. And then I took over half of her little, it was like a little house. And so I took one half of that space and worked with an OT and a PT there, and then needed more space and just found some other great therapists to work with. We each have our own business, but work together as a team. So PT and speech and myself. And 10 years later, here we are.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I love it. That's so great. Well, good for you. I mean, you just went for it and not knowing anybody, and there you are 10 years later thriving. I love it. It's so great. Well, I'm so curious to hear about how you've added all these different trainings and backgrounds to your experience and your expertise. And we're going to go through each of them because I just think they're all important to talk about and have such unique gifts to bring to the table as you're healing with your clients. And so you have a rich background with NDT, and I want to talk about what NDT is, what it stands for, and for those that have never heard of it, what it looks like in practice.
Absolutely. So NDT stands for Neurodevelopmental Treatment, and it is a practice model that looks at the core principles of looking at an individual as a whole. And so when we think about us as human beings, we can't separate our physical attributes from what's happening inside. So all of our internal and external states of being. So we look at both the challenges that a client or a child might present with, as well as their strengths, but we focus really more on those strengths versus on those challenges. So we have to look at all those systems that are involved, knowing that they each have an impact, such as our internal states, which is like our organ systems, our digestion, our circulation, our respiration, and plus all of our external states, meaning all of our senses, near and far senses, hearing, sound, touch, well, hearing and sound are the same. Touch, our balance system, which is our vestibular system, our proprioceptive system, which is how much force we need to do something in an everyday activity. We need a good balance of these two systems. So we call that homeostasis. And so we're really looking at the whole picture of that human being, as well as the environmental context. So all the variables that are involved with that individual's life. And again, I can just go in and work on handwriting or a fine motor task, but if I don't look further into what is truly happening within that visual system, within their balance system, with what may have happened before or after school, before they came to see me, the outcomes are always going to look different if we don't look at that whole picture. And so NDT really works on one, helping individuals be able to move in a way that makes sense to them, that's easy for them to move against gravity. A lot of the kids that we work with have neurological challenges, whether it was from prematurity, different types of genetic disorders, developmental disorders, autism spectrum disorders, the whole spectrum of diagnoses. So looking at it from a very broad spectrum of types of kids that we work with, they all might present, I shouldn't say they all, but many of them do present with movement challenges, whether it's a motor planning issue, a physical attribute, damage to different parts of the brain that cause cerebral palsy or whatnot, lower muscle tone, higher muscle tone. And so the way we treat that individual is we do our assessment, we look at them globally from all of those different systems, and then how can we optimize their function? How can we help them move through space and against gravity in an easier way? Because when you do have those challenges, gravity is heavy.
Yes.
And so, to hold ourselves upright, to be able to sit in a chair and do your work, or to have a conversation, to eat. And so we're really looking at it from a very global perspective, and then using our therapeutic handling and therapeutic touch to facilitate and or inhibit different types of movement experiences. In a nutshell.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I'd love to have you share kind of what that looks like in practice. I can relate. I was thinking of so many clients and as you were sharing that. And actually, the episode that's being released today is all about a little girl with Angelman syndrome
Mm.
and an equine therapy. And I had a PT on that was talking about kind of some similar types of things. So I was thinking about her as you were describing that. And I'd love to have you share a little bit more of what that looks like in the therapy side. And how is that different? I was just curious, how is it different from OTs that are trained in sensory processing and working on sensory? And how does this add another level or another layer?
Yeah. So again, in my perspective and in my learnings, we can't separate sensory from motor. And I know that's hard. And yes, there are therapists that focus specifically on sensory integration, sensory processing. And then there's those that have that NDT background. But to me, they're so intertwined. And so, from a therapeutic standpoint, we do address, sometimes we have to address those sensory systems before we can move further along. So, just as an example that comes to mind, I worked with a little boy that was very, very physically involved, all systems involved, everything. And in order to achieve any kind of functional goal, like independent sitting, reaching, grasping, eating, we had to address those underlying sensory systems in order to get to that next step. And so, again, in terms of treatment, and what I had to do was start really slow, find out from the parent what calms that state of arousal. Like he was very physically involved, so he would go into what's called an epistotonic position, which is where you fully arch back and can't maintain a flexed, a more upright position. Very primitive type of response. And so for them to transition him from car to the home or, from one place to another, we had to figure out strategies that was going to help calm his state and get him into a neutral midline position. And what that looked like was starting with they indicated that he loved sitting in his carrier on top of the washing machine that created a lot of vibration and that heavy proprioceptive input into his body. That was the one thing that really calmed him. And so I kind of like had to think, how can we replicate that in a different type of setting? So I'd be sitting on the ball. He'd be fully wrapped in a blanket. So there's four main parts that help regulate from in utero. And so that I'll just name them real quick. It's the top of the head, the anterior chest, the sacrum, and the soles of the feet. And those are calming points that we can utilize one, two, three, or four on how we position, how we handle, how we move through space while we're holding our child. And so using a blanket with all of that nicely wrapped, almost like physiological flexion, and sitting on a ball, fully supported, bouncing up and down, very, very regulated, and then gradually moving side to side, and then moving a little bit more circular, and then gradually removing the blanket from the top of the head to the shoulders, and just grading it down accordingly. That's just like one extreme example
Yeah.
that comes to mind in terms of treatment. But yeah, so we're using our therapeutic handling to, again, facilitate or inhibit a particular type of emotional or physical response to the environment. And so, again, our focus is on improving their motor control to achieve that active participation and reach their goals. And again, across all areas, home, school, clinic, park, whatever the family actively participates in. What we do in
Amazing.
our everyday life. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I love is that, and you mentioned earlier when you were sharing about NDT, is that it could even vary based on the day. And it sounds like you're just so in the moment, taking a really holistic view at your clients day by day and, considering what they need in that moment.
Absolutely. And that's such a huge part of it because as we know across the board with sensory processing, is it can change minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. And so you just never know. We can have a great plan going in, but it may not transpire the way we thought it would based on where they are at that moment in time.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think a lot of times I've seen clients that where, as an RDI consultant, I'm working with the parents, and the parents will say, but he did it yesterday and he's
Right.
not wanting to do it today. And it can create uncertainty for the parents if they're not aware of that idea that it can really vary and that does not mean that there's necessarily a regression.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, let's go and talk about this idea of getting down to the cellular level. This was something you mentioned to me when we met before, and I thought that was so interesting. I had not heard that before, and I'd love to unpack this a bit and talk about what this means when, you're looking at that individual to that level.
Yes, we are complex human beings. If you really think about it, the human body is so remarkable. And so, just thinking about it in a general way, we have our skeleton. I'm going to just kind of mention some of the things that make us so complex. So, our skeletal system, our muscles, our joints, our ligaments, our bones, our nerves, the neurochemicals that our body produces, our neurotransmitters, our internal organs, the mitochondria, the cells, the fascial system, which is like a spider web of fiber that intertwines everything all the way down to the deepest level of who we are. And so again, when we provide those external stimuli like touch, sight, sound, smell, taste, those signals are registered in our brain as either something that's pleasurable or something that's not, that's noxious. So the way we interpret that sensory information or toxic information coming into our body, it's just dependent on that individual and how they interpret those signals. And when one of those are a little bit off, and it can just be one little thing that sets the whole cycle of an abnormal response to something, it throws us into chaos. And then our response is a negative response, and it kind of goes into what we call an abnormal feedback loop. So basically, and I'm going to just use this one as an example, a smell. So I love the smell of cinnamon, but to somebody else, cinnamon can be extremely noxious. And so when that person smells that cinnamon, instead of me going, that smells so good, that individual is going to have maybe a full-blown emotional response, behavioral response, a shutdown response, in a way that it's hard to sometimes bring them back. And so our goal, obviously, is we want to create a more normal feedback mechanism so that when something comes in, that output is received and perceived in a more appropriate way for them to then have a more appropriate emotional, physical type of response. And so the another thing that I wanted to mention is also our digestion and what we take in, whether it be processed foods or, you know, all the things that we have in our everyday lives that can create chaos. And many of our kiddos on the autism spectrum really struggle with digestive issues for a whole host of reasons. And thinking about yourself, if you have a stomach ache or if you have not been able to eliminate, you're constipated, or the other extreme, you're in constant fight, flight, or fight response. And so when I say like taking it all the way down to the cellular level, everything is working either for or against our bodies and our brain's response to that. And so again, it's just kind of critical that we try to find that nice neutral balance and homeostasis, which is basically balancing out things that are happening internally, things that are happening externally, and how do we approach that? And that's the $1 million question.
Yes. I imagine that's so individualized for each of your clients.
Very much so. Yes. Even for us as individuals, it's so we're individual, all of us. And so, yes, you can say kids on the spectrum or kids that have motility issues, like neurological challenges, generally have a little bit more, it's a little bit more extreme. But, for those that suffer, adults that suffer with autoimmunity issues, things like that, it just has a trickle effect on everything that we do as human beings.
Yeah, fascinating. And when you're diagnosing, or I guess maybe not diagnosing isn't the right word, but when you're deciding that a child has a challenge in this area, how do you determine that? Is it through parent questionnaire? Or is it through your own observation? How are you deciding that they have these types of heightened responses?
Yeah, so that's a good question. As far as what I get from the parents, I do a history, an intake, a sensory checklist. It's not a standardized checklist, but it provides a lot of information. And so it like provides a little bit about their birth history. Were there any red flags along the way? What kinds of challenges did they have early on, shortly after birth or a year or two after birth? And then looking at all of the sensory system. So it's basically a checklist of yes, no, used to, and then additional space for comments. I don't always necessarily get all of the information that I need in the first 1 or 2 sessions. The more you work with a child and family, the more you start to take in that information and kind of get a sense of what their lifestyle is like, what they're open to, what they've been exposed to in terms of like good treatment options. Are they receptive to looking at it from a more holistic standpoint? So, usually within the first couple of sessions, you start to get that sense of what and where they've been and what and the questions that they ask. A lot of times, like if it's a sensory issue and I'm talking to the parent or I'm showing them something with, water beads or slime or food textures, they're like sitting in the background, gagging. Hmm. Maybe we need to switch roles here. Yeah, so it's really it's teasing the onion. It's peeling the onion and peeling those layers to see what might be happening. And the child or the individual often will also show signs. So as an example, if the child's having digestive issues, a position of comfort is on their belly. And so if they lie down on their belly, if they find a piece of furniture and they hang their body over the desk, like where they're getting pressure on the abdominal area, over a ball, I start to wonder, and then I listen for signs. Do I hear signs of reflux? Do I hear a lot of gas? Do I smell a lot of gas, actually? And yes, I do. And so, burping, there's these little soft signs that might indicate that there is a digestive issue, or I watch like for many individuals that might bang their head. Why? Then I have to ask that question, why? Why are we seeing that behavior? Do they have a headache? Do they have a toothache? Do they have an earache? And so and it's not easy, especially for our non-speakers. And thank God, and I'm just throwing this on the side, is that in our community, there's a big community of typers and the use of facilitated communication, as well as some of the other typing methods like spell to communicate and things like that. And very open to that type of approach, which has been life-changing for many of our clients. And they often can indicate or using their augmentative communication device to just, show us head, belly, a body part in some way, shape, or form. And then just kind of getting a sense for the types of physicians they've worked with in the past.
That's amazing. Well, what I love about what you shared is your curiosity, that you're in a state of, really trying to get to the bottom of what's going on for your clients and really going beyond just standard therapy. It sounds like much deeper level.
Right. That's, I think, the part that, when I think about as a holistic treating therapist, yes, there are restrictions depending on the type of setting that you're working in, whether you're in the school system, a hospital where it's like every 30 minutes, or a medical model versus an educational model. So there are, true restrictions that might hinder a therapist from being able to take that time. And I'm very, very blessed and fortunate to work for myself, number one, but
Yes.
also, just the professionals that I've been surrounded with in our community that all are very like-minded. And it's been an amazing process and collaboration, learning from them.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true. And, that's a blessing and a gift that you have that opportunity to take the time
And I
to
don't
reflect.
discredit that at all. I know how grateful, how blessed I am.
Yes, absolutely. And also, as you mentioned, the spellers community, I have some clients that are spellers, and it has been a game changer. And it really has helped us to learn about what's going on when they are in pain and they haven't been able to share that. And it does come out sometimes in behaviors and self-injurious behaviors oftentimes. And now we know even more, what's
Right.
going on, and it's a game changer. So
And how brilliant they are.
amazing.
I'm
Yes.
way above my head.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I had another episode with Betsy Hicks Russ on, and her son is 32 and he's a speller, and it was probably one of my favorite episodes. It was so much fun to talk to her and hear her story. And anyhow, she's fantastic in the field and of sharing, if anybody's curious about it. She has a great Instagram page, but yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that is important, as we're gathering information from our clients, to be able to really get information from them, what is going on for them, and not, we have these hypotheses and we're curious as professionals, but ultimately, if we can get the information from them, then we're going to get right to the source. And I think
Absolutely.
that's so important.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we've talked a little bit about sensory processing as already so far, but I'd love to have you share just even a little bit more for those that have never heard about sensory processing. That's probably been the most common thing in my world that's been around for so long related to this topic. But for those that haven't heard about sensory processing, it'd be great to just do a quick overview of it.
Sure. Yeah. So sensory processing basically just refers to how the nervous system receives, organizes, and interprets that sensory information coming in. And so we can think about it as the input and interpretation stage in terms of what's about to happen when those sensory messages, again, from those external states, are detected and then sent to the nervous system. So, sensory processing. Sensory integration is truly just being able to then put it all together. Can It's a neurological process that organizes the sensory input from multiple systems so that the body can produce an appropriate coordinated response. So, kind of going back to that feedback loop mechanism, we have a sensory input that comes in. We have to register that information, know what it means. Is it noxious or is it pleasurable? And then what kind of response are we going to have from that stimuli coming in? And so there are many individuals that don't register touch a certain way. They might use too much force or not enough force to move through space, to write. When they put their pencil to the paper, they're either writing really lightly or they are pushing so hard that they're constantly having to sharpen their pencil. Children that are walking through their environment, whether it's like in a classroom, they're tripping over obstacles in their path. They're bumping into the table. They're bumping into their peers. And you can imagine they don't mean to do that. But if you're walking down the hall and you're constantly bumping into somebody, the way that that individual might interpret that is, oh, they're pushing me. And they might have an abnormal response back to that person that had no clue that they even bumped into them. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So, and then when I see things like that, even in my own clinic, I look at, okay, what what are they seeking out in terms of movement? What are they seeking out excessive amount of movement, or are they so afraid to even get on a very small dynamic surface that's going to challenge their postural and vestibular system? And so again, I kind of go back to the reference of peeling the onion, and we're just are to me as an occupational therapist or any therapist or teacher or parent, observation is so critical to just, again, looking at that whole picture. Like, what are they seeking out? What are they avoiding? And again, that can change from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. And so, as far as treatment, and depending on how that child is responding or lack of response, guides how I treat. And like just in terms of if I'm working with a client for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or 60 minutes, generally 45 to 60 minutes, but sometimes for scheduling reasons, we have to do 30. I start with sensory motor types of activities, whole body movements, rhythmic exercises, challenging their balance system, providing that good global sensory information into their whole body, which then really prepares and sets the stage for a more refined fine motor, visual motor type of task or self-help activity, depending on what their goals are. But if we don't create, kind of going back to motor planning and praxis, that's a big part of our sensory foundation. So if we kind of think of it as a pyramid, and that bottom of the pyramid is our sensory foundation, body and space, bilateral integration, meaning using both hands for a task, one hand to stabilize, one hand to manipulate. How we explore the environment. Can we move through space in a variety of movement patterns versus just flexion and extension or just pushing back? You know what I mean? Like we have to have the variety of movement experiences that sends the signals to our auditory pathways, our visual pathways, our balance pathways in order to get to the next level, which is sensory perception and integration and higher level skills of executive function and cognition. And so it's kind of like a building block and that sensory foundation. Without that, we're not going to get to those next steps in that hierarchy.
Yeah, it's so important. I think that what's so unique or important to mention is that it can be worked on, that, you can see great progress with this work.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes,
Oh,
and I think
yes.
it's been around. It's been around for quite some time, and is, I'm sure it's gotten even more evolved as well. But I think it's, as you mentioned, it's kind of like that pyramid that you really, one thing leads to another. So it is really important that it's in place, and I don't know if the right term would be fully integrated, but that the child is established in this area.
Yeah, and so that's actually a good point. Like, do we ever get to that point of full sensory integration? I don't know the answer to that. But what we do know is that the child or the individual, even our young adults and adults, can make those changes and learn to receive that sensory information in a way that's not going to create a negative type of response. They may not like it, just like we do things that we don't like, but we can have a more appropriate outcome. And then we have kids that actually thrive on learning new skills. Like I'll have a child that can't ride a bicycle, they can't get on a scooter. And with a lot of repetition, the brain needs a lot of repetition over and over and over again, thinking about like an infant, toddler. They
Right.
practice the same skill 100,000 times.
Right. So
That there's
true.
actually a number, and I can't remember what that fact is, but in order for the brain to develop a new motor plan, I want to say it's like 300,000 repetitions of something. I could be totally off on that number,
Right.
but it's a lot.
It's a lot.
And so the brain is so malleable and adaptable, and the neuroplasticity that we have is really incredible.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point too. And I think about it a lot with social emotional learning that I work on with my clients, but with the motor skills, it's so true. I have a client right now that came to mind that is learning to ride a bike and has some balance challenges, and how he just needs a lot of repetition to, as you know, and over time he's getting more and more confident, but
It's breaking
practice.
And it's breaking those skills down, like looking at it from a task analysis standpoint. What does it take to ride a bicycle? You don't just practice riding a bicycle over and over and over again, but we break it down into really small little pieces. And I worked on this skill with a young man with Down syndrome, and he finally got it after a couple of months of practicing it every week and having the parent do exercises with him at home. And when you get those videos of him successfully riding, it's the most fantastic thing in the world.
Yes, it is. It's so rewarding. I love it. It's so great. Okay, well, wonderful. Well, let's go on to the listening program. You are also certified in TLP, and I did have Alex Doman on as well. He did a great job explaining the listening program for those that have not heard of the listening program. That was a great episode to learn more. But let's talk about how you use TLP in your support and your practice to kind of enhance what you're already doing.
Sure. So, as an OT, I felt like there was a missing link in terms of addressing the sensory systems. And in OT school, we really don't get a lot from the auditory standpoint. Speech pathologists, that's their whole thing. But when you think about it, we get more on the visual system and some of the other things that we talked about. But the auditory system, to me, if they can't follow a basic direction, if they can't process the sounds that are coming in, if they have noise sensitivities and they're walking around like this all the time, if they have voice modulation issues, they're speaking too loud or too soft, or responding to their name being called, this obviously is going to have an impact on what we do and where we can go in treatment. And so in my research, probably around 2004, shortly after I moved to Northeast Florida, I started researching it, and I found the Tomatis method, which Alfred Tomatis was the grandfather of all other sound-based interventions. And so I was fortunate enough to go to Maryland to what they used to have, it was called the Spectrum Center, did a 3-week intensive training on the Tomatis method. And so at the time, and I was utilizing that in my practice. But then with the available technology and the cost that was involved to provide that type of program was sometimes just too prohibitive and time prohibitive. And so I started looking further into my research and came across the listening program through Advanced Brain Technologies. And I did their training to become a certified provider of the listening program. And what I love about their program is that they are so dedicated to the research and the product development and using newer and newer technologies to get to that end result of their products. And it's just such a fantastic organization. There are other sound-based programs out there that I'm sure provide, obviously good outcomes as well. There are several different ones. I just happen to connect with Advanced Brain Technologies. And in the early years, they had done some wonderful conventions, big conferences with fantastic speakers from all over the world. And I just really connected well with that program, and I use it for myself. And so what's great about it is it's now, done at home, and I can guide that family in using the listening program as part of their daily routine. And we see really fantastic results with it. So another part of that is their sound health library, which is, I believe, 10 different albums, such as music for thinking, music for learning, productivity, de-stress, relax. I use those in my clinic all the time. So I'll set the environment based on the client that's coming in. So in training, the brain and the body, whether they need revving up or calming down, those albums are based on beats per minute. And so music for thinking, if we're doing a cognitive activity, music for inspiration or motivation, if we're doing a more gross motor or even a creative type of activity, music for learning, just wonderful, wonderful albums to utilize at home and in the clinic.
Yes, I didn't realize they had those as well. That's so great to know about. And yeah, I love that program. It's been on my list to sign up. I did the free week trial, and I loved it. I looked forward to it every day, and I just felt energized after, and just, I don't know how to explain it, just more clear-headed and sharp.
Well, it really enhances focus, attention, concentration, auditory processing, helping dampen noise sensitivities for individuals. They have several different programs to choose from. I'm right now just finishing up 4 cycles of the TLP Achieve. And what I have noticed for myself is I feel like I hear myself better when I'm talking. I can be a better listener to someone else that's talking, more even keel in my overall sensory regulatory state, mostly emotional regulation.
Yes.
It stimulates the vagus nerve, which we know is so important for really whole body types of responses and working on that limbic system and emotional responses. So I do highly recommend that program for across the board for many of my clients if they're able to participate. And they have an online program and a program where you can buy the system where you can choose one core program, 2, 3, or 4, whatnot. But the online program is very cost effective and wonderful to incorporate into their daily lives.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about it, is that it is really accessible for the masses. And
Yes.
they did a fantastic job with that as they've evolved over the years too. I had told him that we used to offer it at our clinic. We had an OT that would offer it with the CDs.
Exactly.
And I love how they've evolved. Yes, way back. Yes.
We've had all the iPad, all the different grades of iPods, now to the iPad, because Apple doesn't even make iPods anymore.
Right, yes. Gotta keep up with the times.
Exactly.
Oh, Fantastic. All right, so let's talk about yoga and Reiki. This is going to round out all of your tools. And I just love that you have this background as well. Find it so fascinating that you bring this into the mix too. So let's talk about how you bring these two practices into your work as an OT.
Yes. So, one, I love yoga for myself and have been practicing for many years now. And I was fortunate again in my community to my yoga teacher that I was, just going to my weekly classes with was an integrative yoga therapy teacher certified to teach the training through the Kripalu Institute. And so I did that training for both myself and for the clients that I serve, because I think our kids are just little natural yogis anyhow. So I incorporate a lot of the yogic strategies and principles and yoga poses as part of my OT sessions. So it really is a beautiful blend with neurodevelopmental treatment too, because if you think about it, just doing a yoga pose, crossing midline, core strength, postural stability, working off an active base of support to, sit up straight. So there's so many elements that just blend so beautifully together. Not to mention the focus and the attention and the cognitive and the processing and all of that. So there's just so many wonderful benefits to using those principles in my everyday practice. And one of the most important things is the breath, being able to breathe. I think so many of us go through life holding our breaths or just have shallow breathing or lots of sighing, lots of yawning. And we need good oxygenation into our brains and bodies to function. Like it's critical. I think of it as breath is music, breath is rhythm, breath is life force, prana, energy. And there's so many other elements to the breath and what we see in terms of some of our neurological kiddos, someone that has a lot of physiological or physical challenges, is that they can't organize that rhythmic pattern. We breathe in, we exhale, we talk. But especially for those that do speech therapy, and any of us as therapists, we might see they're verbalizing on the inhale. They're vocalizing on an inhale as opposed to the exhale. And so again, helping them coordinate, and again, can be part of praxis, and helping them learn what muscles need to work, our diaphragm, our lungs, the rib cage needs to expand when we take a breath. We work on the belly breath. So just even from that standpoint alone is so huge and really helps with then helping them have better focus and sustained focus and ability. And it's just so fun. Kids love it. And so I use different yoga decks. There's yoga pretzels and different yoga games. There's a yoga Rilla game that I use, or even I have found in Target like the little hopscotch things that fit together, and they're all yoga poses. And so we can spend 15 minutes using yoga as our sensory prep work, or we can spend 30 minutes and accomplish all of our goals that we're working on, whether it's again, crossing midline, bilateral integration, sustaining one position for more than 3 seconds. We have kids that are here, there, and everywhere, right? They have such a hard time getting grounded. And I find that yoga is such a fantastic way, and it blends so beautifully with everything else that I do in the tools that I have available to me. And as far as Reiki is concerned, I was trained as a Reiki master many years ago, also from my same yoga teacher,
Mm.
but don't consider myself a master of Reiki at all. But I have that foundation and I have that energy work also through some other alternative types of practices, whether it's myofascial release or cranial sacral therapy, a lot of the healing touch modalities that are so powerful in terms of our energy and how we present ourselves. And I don't want this to sound too woohoo, but basically, when you walk into a room if it feels good or not. What we as therapists, when we're working with our families, the type of energy that we have going into that session, as well as the type of energy that's coming from the child, what's coming from the parent, is there a mismatch along the way? And how can we bring that energy into full circle where everybody's in sync with each other? And so that's kind of the way I work, is trying to set the intention in a positive way versus a negative way. Like if I know that a kiddo is coming in and they're one that pulls my hair, they can spit, they can bite, they can pinch. And if I say, oh, I'm going to see this kid and I love them dearly, despite all that, but you don't want to like be attacked. Like I'm
Right.
having a good hair day, please don't mess my by the end of the day, it's like, whoa, out to here. But if I set the intention that this is going to be a really good day and we're going to mm, not master, but we're going to be successful in meeting some of our mini goals for whatever that might be. Maybe it's a new food texture. Maybe it's being exposed to a type of touch sensation without a gag, things like that. And if I go in like, oh my God, I know they're going to throw up. Or if I go in and say, this is going to be a great day, setting positive intentions are so powerful. So that's kind of how I address that type of work in terms of, the
Yeah.
therapeutic technology.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I believe that wholeheartedly. It's palpable when you set those intentions, and I think also when you're aware of how energy impacts others and your energy, but also the energy of the parents and the energy of the client. And, it is to have that awareness, and that training really is a unique gift to have. And I think I mentioned to you, I've done a lot of work with a shaman, which is a Peruvian energy healer. I don't have the training myself to do it with clients, but I understand it on a personal level and how it is a tangible thing. And a lot of people might think it's a little out there, but it really is very concrete once you can feel it and sense it. And it can be a tool you use for sure to help create that regulation and that stability. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
and so we've kind of reviewed all of the many tools that you have, and I'm so curious. I was just thinking as you were sharing how many different things you kind of hop through as you're thinking about your clients. How do you weave it all together and blend it all? Because it's a lot of different trainings and tools to pull from.
That's such a great question. I pray that my intuition is right on when the child comes into their session. And so I can usually get a sense again when they walk in, like how are they approaching the environment? Are they stressed out from being on a school bus and then the parent picking them up and then they're running and like running here, there, and everywhere and they're like, and so really just again preparing them based on where they are and asking them, what does your body need? Can we start in my OT fine motor room? Do we want to start there or do we want to start in the gym? Does your body need movement or are you good to focus on I kind of share like what we might be doing, whether it's like making a craft, a holiday craft, a recipe, something. And so kind of just like really looking to see where they're at in that moment in time. And like you said earlier, being in that present moment is so critical. And then considering our and we kind of just mentioned this, but considering our own energy level, if I'm treating a child at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm like, oh my God, I have so many notes to write and the gym is a mess and I need to clean up and I'm hungry, you know, I have, again, going back to that being in sync and balancing all of that out. But really, it's just finding what their body needs at that moment in time. And sometimes some of my like older elementary school kids or older can absolutely communicate, whether it's through an AAC device, augmentative communication, whether it's through gesturing, whether it's them verbally saying, I need to swing or I need to jump, or they just show me automatically what they seek out. And so I kind of
Yeah.
just go with the flow in regards
Yeah.
to, following their lead. I
Hmm.
always like to think of therapy as a dance. I lead, they follow, they lead, I follow. And there's this beautiful, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes. That's the beauty of it. It's part of
Yeah.
the dance. You make adjustments as you go.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it's not like that I'm necessarily thinking I'm going to do this type of method or I'm going to do that type of method. I think as a seasoned therapist, because I'm pretty seasoned, just a lot of years, um,
Yes.
that it just all starts to blend naturally. And, the PT that I work with, she also has background in NDT and very strong sensory. And we don't even have to communicate if we're co-treating a child. We just place our hands on without even having to say a word. Like we just know. And then she'll say something and I'll be like, that's exactly what I was thinking. Or we're going to go this way. Oh, yes, I was thinking the same thing. It just like, woo, it happens. So it's really
Amazing.
cool. Hmm.
Yes. I mean, the two of you then just energetically sync up as well.
Exactly.
And that
Yeah.
probably creates an even more, grounding force for the child. That's very cool. Very cool. I love it. All right. Well, I'd love to have you kind of share how, if families are wanting this kind of support and, or if there's professionals out there, if you have any kind of resources or tools that you could recommend for any parents or professionals that may not be in your area, but are looking for some more information.
Yeah. So the clients and their families are, I think, always looking for something. And it can be really overwhelming. So the first thing I say, I try not to overwhelm them with like a whole host of things, but I would say finding a physician that you wholeheartedly trust that can look at that person wholeheartedly, looking at it from those internal and external states. And I'm so fortunate to work with the doctor that I was sharing space with early on when I moved here. Her name is Dr. Julie Buckley. She is a pediatrician that specializes in children with autism and young adults. And she's my doctor too, actually. So,
Okay.
um,
Great.
she did, she was a mainstream pediatrician until things happened with her own daughter as a response to some environmental toxins and things like that, that she then ended up with pretty sick, autism. I'll just say it like that. Can't rate it. But anyhow, so looking at things from a biomedical standpoint, healing from the inside out. So finding somebody, even if they do virtual, it may not be in your area because there's so many people that live in communities that don't have access to that kind of doctor, but they're available out there. As far as the listening program, advanced brain technologies, and as far as sensory processing, there's so many fantastic resources out there. A few that I utilize are the START Institute for Sensory Processing Disorders, Harkla, all things sensory. There are wonderful integrative yoga therapy programs available. And I know that a lot of this will be in the show notes, but just to mention a few, Sonia Sumar. She has a method. It used to be yoga for the special child. It's the Sonia Sumar method, yoga for all abilities. There's lots of trainings available. The Neurodevelopmental Treatment Association. We didn't even really touch on this at all, but like reflex integration, there's some really fantastic programs out there that for therapists especially, and for families to seek out someone that specializes in integration of the reflexes. So a few that I use are the Muscatova method, Move, Play, Thrive, reflex integration, and then just to plug myself a little bit too.
Yeah. Yes.
I also teach 2 different workshops for CHOW seminars. They're located in Pensacola, Florida, and one is Learn to Play the NDT Way. So this is for therapists, for OT, PT, speech therapists, or anyone working in this type of field. And so it's Learn to Play the NDT Way. It can be done live stream from home or to come into the studio in the beautiful Pensacola Beaches area.
Okay, great.
Which is on the west coast of Florida. And I also teach a 1-day adaptive yoga course through them as well. So those are some basic resources. There are so many out there. And like I said, it can be overwhelming, but just finding what resonates with you and your family or your situation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing those, and we'll make sure to include those all in the show notes so that you can use it as a reference guide. And then how will people find you?
Well, they can either email, on Facebook, my Occu Play Inc. Facebook page. If you go to my personal page, Nancy Marin, you'll see lots of sunrises because I live 2 miles from the beach on the East Coast. So I do that's what grounds me, is my sunrise walks every morning. Nancy Marin on LinkedIn. And so Facebook and Instagram is Occu Play Inc. Nancy Marin on LinkedIn. And I will be happy to share my email as well, and they can reach out to me directly. I am available for consultations. I can't treat per se outside the state of Florida, but I do consultations and coaching as well.
Great. Fantastic. Well, that will all be in the show notes too. And this was just fantastic. Such a wealth of information that you were able to share. And thank you so much for all the work you're doing to help your clients all these years. It's amazing things. And just for being here today and sharing all of this information. I'm so glad we got this out there and had this opportunity to chat further about this important topic. So thank you so much, Nancy.
Oh, absolutely. You are so welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure. Yes.
I just wanted to share for the families that are out there to never, ever give up. I see miracles happen every day. And so again, kind of going back to our brains are so capable of making change, and it might take longer for an older child or young adult, but the neuroplasticity that's available is there. And so finding what resonates, we shared a lot of information, but finding what resonates with you, your family, your belief systems, and just taking it one day at a time. Enjoy, have fun, be in nature, sing, be silly, all those things to help regulate the whole family.
It's a beautiful way to end. I love that. Thank you so much. It's so true, and it's fantastic. And I think it's important. We don't give up hope. We keep going. We keep trying. We keep moving forward. So thank you for sharing that.
Amen.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back there. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I find. I'll break the molds with rebels mind. I'm a hurricane of free born mind.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.